council chamber stretched vast and cold under artificial lights that mimicked a dozen different home suns. Ambassador Lisa Morgan sat in the human delegation section, her hands folded on the table before her, watching as the Vraxi representative spoke in that peculiar clicking language that the translation devices struggled to render properly. She had been sitting in this same chair for 3 years now, attending these same meetings, making these same arguments, and receiving these same dismissive responses. The air smelled recycled and sterile, scrubbed clean of anything that might offend the 67 different species that comprised the Galactic Council. Lisa thought about Earth sometimes during these long sessions, about the smell of rain on concrete and fresh coffee in the morning, simple things that seemed impossibly distant now in this place where nothing was ever quite comfortable for anyone. Council leader Vraximus gestured with one of his upper appendages, the movement slow and deliberate in a way that suggested great patience with lesser beings. His skin held that peculiar purple-gray tone that marked his species as one of the eldest in the galaxy, one of the first to achieve faster-than-light travel, one of the civilizations that believed age granted wisdom and authority. His voice carried through the translation system with a tone that managed to sound condescending in any language. "The human proposal for equal trade access is noted," Vraximus said, his words falling like stones into still water. "However, the Council must consider the maturity of the requesting species."
Humanity has been a spacefaring civilization for merely 2 centuries.
The Vraxi Collective has navigated the stars for 15,000 years. Surely the humans understand that certain privileges come with time and proven stability. Lisa felt the familiar tightness in her chest, that mixture of frustration and anger that she had learned to keep buried beneath layers of diplomatic training. Beside her, Daniel Brooks shifted in his seat, his jaw clenching in a way that told her he was struggling with the same emotions. On her other side, Karen White kept her expression perfectly neutral, but her knuckles had gone white where she gripped her datapad. The Keltheran ambassador rose next, his scaled form catching the light as he moved. The Keltheran Empire controlled a quarter of known space and never let anyone forget it. His species had a reputation for military precision, and an even stronger reputation for looking down on younger civilizations. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of assumed superiority. "The Keltheran Empire seconds the Vraxi position," he said flatly. "Furthermore, we must express concern about human expansion rates. Your species colonizes aggressively, claims territory without proper consultation, and demonstrates the impulsiveness characteristic of younger races. Perhaps another century of observation is required before full membership privileges can be considered." Lisa watched as several other delegations nodded their agreement. The Morphid Coalition remained silent as they always did, their insectoid representatives showing no readable expression. The Selthan Confederacy likewise offered no support, their aquatic environment suits bubbling quietly as they observed without commitment. This was how it always went, the elder races dismissing human concerns while the younger species stayed silent, unwilling to risk their own standing by supporting humanity. She had prepared a response, of course. Lisa Morgan had not become Earth's chief ambassador by being unprepared. She activated her datapad and brought up the presentation she had spent weeks perfecting. Data and charts and evidence of human contributions to galactic civilization. Her fingers moved across the controls, sending the information to the central display. "If I may address the Council," Lisa said, her voice steady despite the frustration burning in her chest. "Humanity has been a contributing member of this community for 3 years. In that time, human scientists have collaborated on 17 major research initiatives. Human peacekeepers have served in 9 conflict zones, and human trade vessels have opened 12 new routes that benefit multiple species. We have demonstrated our commitment to galactic cooperation through action, not merely words." The display showed images of human doctors working alongside alien colleagues, human engineers solving problems that had stumped elder species for decades, human diplomats mediating disputes between civilizations that refused to speak directly to each other. The evidence was clear and undeniable, or at least it should have been. Vraximus barely glanced at the display before responding. "Your enthusiasm is noted, Ambassador Morgan. However, enthusiasm is not the same as wisdom. The Council appreciates human contributions, but we must maintain standards that have served galactic civilization for millennia. Your species shows great potential, certainly, but potential must be tempered with time. Give it another century, perhaps two, and we can revisit this discussion. Another century. Lisa felt something crack inside her at those words. She had heard variations of this response dozens of times before, but somehow this time it hit differently. Another century meant everyone in this room would be long dead. It meant her children would grow old without seeing humanity gain equal status. It meant generations of humans would continue to be treated as junior members, as enthusiastic children who needed to be patted on the head and told to wait their turn. She looked around the chamber at the representatives of species that had been negotiating from positions of comfort for thousands of years. They sat in their customized chairs, breathed their preferred atmospheres through personal environmental systems, and made decisions that affected billions of lives with casual waves of appendages and tentacles and whatever other limbs evolution had granted them. Not one of them seemed to consider that their comfortable position came partly from human efforts, from the mediation work that humanity had been doing for 3 years, without recognition or reward. Daniel leaned close and whispered, "Lisa, maybe we should call for a recess, regroup, and try again next session." But Lisa was done regrouping. She was done trying again. She was done sitting in this cold chamber and begging for scraps of respect from civilizations that would never see humans as anything other than useful newcomers. Something crystallized in her mind, a clarity that came from finally understanding a simple truth. You cannot negotiate with people who fundamentally do not respect you. She stood up, the movement drawing surprised looks from nearby delegations. Lisa reached down and gathered her datapad, her notes, her carefully prepared arguments that had never been good enough. Karen and Daniel stared at her, confusion clear on their faces. The chamber had gone quiet, all attention focusing on the human delegation. Fraximus tilted his head in that way that suggested curiosity mixed with irritation. "Ambassador Morgan, the session is not concluded. Do you require a brief recess for your delegation?" Lisa looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not an individual but a system that would always find reasons to keep humanity waiting, always discover new hoops to jump through, always move the goalposts just far enough to keep equal status out of reach. She thought about going home and reporting another failure to President Bennett, about explaining to human colonies that they would have to wait another century for fair treatment, about watching her species continue to do the thankless work of holding galactic civilization together while receiving nothing in return. "No," Lisa said quietly. "We do not require a recess." She picked up her briefcase and looked at Daniel and Karen. "Gather your materials. We are leaving." Daniel's eyes went wide. "Lisa, what are you doing?" "What we should have done 2 years ago," she replied. She turned back to face Fraximus and the assembled council. "Ambassador Morgan, surely you are not suggesting—" Fraximus began, his tone now uncertain. Lisa cut him off with 5 words that would echo across the galaxy, 5 words that carried the weight of 3 years of frustration and centuries of human stubbornness. "Then we are done here." The chamber fell into absolute silence. Lisa walked toward the exit, her footsteps loud in the sudden quiet. Behind her she heard Karen and Daniel scrambling to follow, their own disbelief clear but their loyalty stronger. The human delegation moved as one toward the massive doors that led out of the council chamber. "Ambassador Morgan, please be reasonable," Fraximus called after her, his voice losing its condescending edge and taking on something that might have been concern. "You cannot simply walk away from the Galactic Council. This is not how civilized species conduct diplomacy." Lisa stopped at the doorway and looked back one final time. "Council Leader Fraximus, we have been reasonable for 3 years. We have been patient and cooperative in everything you asked us to be, and it was never enough. So now we will be something else. We will be done." The doors slid open and the human delegation walked through them. Behind them, the Galactic Council sat in stunned silence, unable to process what had just happened. In 15,000 years of galactic civilization, no species had ever simply left the council chambers. There were protocols for disagreement, procedures for expressing displeasure, established methods for negotiating better terms. But walking away, simply abandoning the table and all the carefully maintained diplomatic structures, that was not something civilized species did. The first month after the walkout felt strange to Commander Jake Phillips as he stood on the bridge of the human vessel Defender, watching the stars slip past in that peculiar way they did when a ship traveled faster than light. His orders had come through 3 weeks ago, simple and direct in a way that military commands rarely were. Withdraw all human forces from joint galactic operations and return to human space. No explanation had been provided, but Jake had seen the news broadcasts and he understood what was happening. The Galactic Council had expected humanity to come crawling back within days, apologetic and ready to accept whatever terms were offered. Instead, they got silence. Human ambassadors closed their offices on alien worlds with polite thank you notes and departed without drama. Human trade ships stopped docking at multi-species stations and rerouted to purely human ports. Human research teams packed up their equipment from joint facilities and went home. It was not angry or vengeful, just a quiet and total withdrawal that seemed to unsettle the elder races more than any tantrum would have. Jake thought about his counterpart on the Keltheran warship that had been patrolling this sector alongside the Defender. For the past 8 months, Commander Zeltix had been professional enough. If somewhat condescending in that way, the Keltheran seemed unable to avoid. They had coordinated well during the pirate suppression operations, their 2 ships working together to clear out 3 different raider bases. Now Jake was leaving, and Zeltix would have to manage this entire sector alone. The communication system chirped, and Zeltix's scaled face appeared on the screen, his expression difficult to read but his tone carrying something that might have been concern. Commander Phillips, I have received word of your departure orders. Surely there has been some mistake. The sector patrol rotation does not end for another 4 months. Jake kept his expression neutral. No mistake, Commander. All human forces are being recalled to human space. Your people will need to arrange alternative coverage for this sector. But the raiders, Zeltix protested, his usual arrogance giving way to something closer to alarm. The suppression operations are not complete. Without your vessel providing support, my ship cannot effectively patrol the entire region. We need at least 6 more months to ensure the lanes are secure. Then I suggest you request reinforcements from the Keltheran Empire, Jake replied calmly. I have my orders and I intend to follow them. Zeltix's eyes narrowed in that peculiar way his species had when they were trying to understand something that did not fit their worldview. This is about the council dispute, is it not? Commander, surely you understand that politics should not interfere with necessary security operations. Lives are at stake in this sector. Jake felt a flash of anger but kept it buried beneath years of military discipline. Commander Zeltix, for 8 months I have listened to you explain why human vessels should take the more dangerous patrol routes, because Keltheran ships are too valuable to risk. I have watched you take credit for successful operations that my crew executed. I have heard you tell your superiors that the Keltheran Empire is maintaining sector security, while barely mentioning human contributions. Now you want to lecture me about how politics should not interfere with duty? The Keltheran commander had the decency to look uncomfortable. Commander Phillips, I may have been less than generous in my reports, but that does not change the reality of the situation. If you withdraw now, people will die, merchant vessels will be attacked, colonies will be vulnerable. Then I suggest the Galactic Council should have thought about that before treating humanity like enthusiastic children who needed to wait our turn. Jake said quietly. My orders stand. Defender out. He cut the connection before Zeltix could respond. Around him on the bridge, his crew worked in focused silence, but Jake could see the small smiles on several faces. They had all felt the casual disrespect, the assumption that human lives and human effort were somehow worth less than those of the elder races. Now the galaxy was about to learn what it felt like when humans stopped volunteering to do the difficult and dangerous work. On Earth, President Claire Bennett stood before a crowd of 200,000 people gathered in the old stadium that had once hosted sporting events but now served as a venue for major government announcements. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the assembled masses, and Claire could feel the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. What she said today would define not just her presidency, but possibly the next century of human development. My fellow humans, she began, her voice amplified across the stadium and broadcast to every human world and station. 3 years ago, we joined the Galactic Council with hope and optimism. We believed that cooperation and goodwill would earn us respect and equal treatment. We were wrong, the crowd murmured, a sound like distant thunder rolling through the stadium. Claire raised her hand and they fell silent again. The elder races of the galaxy have made their position clear. They see us as children playing at civilization, as a useful but ultimately inferior species that must wait our turn for perhaps another century or more. before we are granted the basic respect that should be the right of any sentient civilization. They are comfortable taking our help, our labor, our ideas, and our lives when it suits their purposes, but they are not willing to treat us as equals. She paused and looked out across the sea of faces, human faces of every shade and background, united now by shared frustration and awakening pride. So we have made a decision. If the Galactic Council will not welcome us as equals, then we will not beg for their approval. Instead, we will focus our energy and resources on ourselves, on human space, on human development, on the human future. The crowd erupted in approval, the sound deafening even through the noise-canceling systems that protected Claire's ears. She let them cheer for a long moment before raising her hand again for silence. I am announcing today the Horizon Initiative, a comprehensive plan to redirect all resources previously devoted to galactic cooperation toward internal human development. We will expand our colonies at triple the previous rate. We will pour funding into research and development without the restrictions the Council placed on our technological advancement. We will build a human civilization so strong and prosperous that we need no one's permission to thrive. More cheers, louder now, and Claire felt something shift in the collective mood of humanity. For 3 years they had been trying to fit into a galactic community that did not want them except as junior partners and convenient laborers. Now they were choosing a different path, one that led away from the Council, chambers, and out toward the unexplored regions of space where humans could build something new without asking permission from civilizations that had long ago forgotten what it meant to struggle and grow. The 6 months following the walkout revealed the depth of humanity's integration into galactic civilization in ways that shocked even the humans themselves. Trade routes that had seemed stable for decades began to collapse because human merchants had been the only ones willing to deal with both sides of hostile alien factions. The Morphid Coalition and Selthan Confederacy had been at odds for centuries, but human traders had found ways to facilitate commerce between them through neutral human ports. Now those goods stopped flowing and prices began to spike. Peacekeeping missions failed in 3 different sectors because human forces had been providing the neutral ground that allowed hostile species to work together without losing face. The Vraxi and Keltherin had been managing their tense border through joint patrols that were really just humans keeping both sides separated. When the human ships withdrew, the patrols fell apart and border incidents increased. Scientific collaborations ground to a halt because humans had been bridging the language and cultural gaps that the elder races could not or would not cross themselves. A major medical research project studying a plague that affected 4 different species collapsed when the human researchers left, taking with them not just their data, but their ability to translate concepts between species that thought about biology in fundamentally different ways. On the Vraxi homeworld, Council leader Vraximus sat in his private office reviewing reports that grew more alarming with each passing day. Trade was disrupted, security was compromised, research was stalled, and a dozen minor crises were threatening to become major ones. His advisors had been unanimous in their assessment. The humans had been doing far more work than anyone had realized, handling all the small difficult tasks that the elder races found beneath their dignity or too complicated to bother with. Surely they will return soon, his chief advisor said, mandibles clicking nervously. They need us more than we need them. Human space is small and their resources are limited. They cannot survive in isolation. Vraximus wanted to believe that, but something in his long experience whispered warnings. He had dismissed the humans as a young, impulsive race that would learn patience in time, but walking away from the council table without anger or threats, simply ending the discussion and departing with quiet dignity, that was not impulsive behavior. That was the action of a species that had made a calculated decision and would not be easily swayed from it. 20 years had passed since Ambassador Lisa Morgan walked out of the Galactic Council chambers, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Captain Henry Blake stood on the observation deck of the exploration vessel Frontier, watching a blue-green world rotate slowly beneath them. This was the 3rd habitable planet his crew had discovered this year, and they were only 8 months into the current exploration cycle. The planet had oceans and atmosphere and all the markers of a world that could support human life with minimal terraforming. Mark it on the charts, Henry told his science officer, a young woman named Beth Cooper, who had never lived in a time when humans sought approval from the Galactic Council. Send the data back to Colonial Administration. They will want to get survey teams out here within 6 months. Beth nodded and worked at her console, efficient and confident in a way that reminded Henry of how much had changed. The young people in human space now grew up knowing they were part of an independent civilization that answered to no one but themselves. They did not carry the scars of condescension and dismissal that Henry's generation had endured. They simply assumed humans were capable of anything because that was all they had ever been taught. The frontier had been exploring the outer regions of what humans now called the expansion zone for 3 years. They did not report their findings to the Galactic Survey Authority because humans no longer participated in that organization. They did not ask permission to claim new worlds because there was no one whose permission they needed. The Council had wanted humanity to wait another century before being granted full member privileges, so humans had simply stopped waiting and started building their own future. "Captain, we are picking up an automated beacon," the communications officer called out. "Galactic Council standard frequency. It is asking us to identify ourselves and state our purpose in this region." Henry smiled slightly. The galaxy was full of these old beacons, relics of a time when the Council believed it controlled who could go where. "Ignore it. Plot a course to the 4th planet in the next system." The initial scans suggested it might have rare mineral deposits. On Mars, in a research facility that had grown from a small outpost into a city of 30,000 people, Dr. Patricia Hayes made the final adjustments to her quantum entanglement communication array. She had been working on this project for 7 years, ever since she realized that the limitations the Galactic Council had placed on human research were holding back developments that could revolutionize how civilizations communicated across the vast distances of space. Without those limitations, without the need to submit every experiment for Council approval and wait months for permission that often never came, Patricia had been free to explore theories that elder races considered too expensive or too risky. The array hummed to life, and Patricia held her breath as the quantum pairs stabilized. On her screen, she saw the connection established with the receiving station on a human colony 17 light-years away. The message appeared instantly. No delay. No waiting for light to crawl across the emptiness between stars. She had done it. Humans now had instant communication across any distance, a technology that would bind their scattered colonies together in ways the Council races had never achieved. "Send a message to all human research stations," Patricia told her assistant, a man named Scott Davis who had been with her since the beginning of the project. "Tell them the quantum network is operational. We are offering the technology free to all human worlds. They can start building their own nodes immediately." Scott grinned and started composing the message. Patricia leaned back in her chair and thought about all the times the Council's Research Oversight Committee had rejected her proposals, calling them impractical or too theoretical. Now humans would have technology that the elder races could only dream about, and Patricia had no intention of sharing it with civilizations that had spent 3 years telling humanity to be patient and wait their turn. In Earth's orbital shipyards, engineer Kyle Morrison watched the final sections of the new fusion drive being installed into the colony ship Providence. The drive used principles that the Galactic Council had banned for civilian vessels, claiming they were too dangerous despite humans having proven the safety protocols were more than adequate. Without Council regulations restricting their designs, human engineers had created drives that cut travel time between human worlds by half. What used to take 6 months now took 3, and colonies that had felt isolated and distant suddenly became close neighbors. "How soon until we can start production runs?" Kyle asked his team leader, a woman named Helen Garcia who had worked in the shipyards longer than Kyle had been alive. "Give us another month for final testing. Then we can start converting the entire civilian fleet," Helen replied. "Within 2 years, every human ship will have the new drives. We will be able to reach the outer colonies in less time than it used to take to reach Mars." Kyle nodded, satisfaction warming his chest. He had proposed this exact drive design to the Council's Technology Assessment Board 6 years ago, when humans were still trying to work within the galactic system. The board had rejected it without even testing the prototype, citing regulations that were centuries old and written by species that had never bothered to update their understanding of fusion dynamics. Now humanity was leaping ahead while the Council races crawled along using outdated technology, because changing anything required votes and committees and endless debates among civilizations that moved at the speed of their slowest member. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council chambers had become a place of constant crisis. Council leader Vraximus, now ancient even by the long-lived standards of his species, presided over meetings that felt more like disaster management sessions than the dignified deliberations of elder civilizations. The Keltheran Empire and Vraxi Collective had been edging toward war for 5 years, their border disputes escalating without human mediators to provide neutral ground for negotiations. Trade disputes between dozens of species had devolved into blockades and economic sanctions that hurt everyone involved. Piracy had spread through 6 different sectors that human patrols used to protect, and the elder races discovered they could not coordinate their security forces effectively without humans handling the logistics. Ambassador Kelrix of the Morphid Coalition sat in his private chambers after another frustrating council session and admitted to his chief advisor what no one wanted to say publicly. "We took them for granted," Kelrix said, his mandibles clicking softly in distress. "The humans were doing all the difficult work, all the thankless tasks of actually holding galactic civilization together, and we treated them like servants. Now everything is falling apart and we have no idea how to fix it." His advisor, a younger Morphid named Thex, shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we could approach them again, offer better terms, acknowledge our mistakes." "I have tried," Kelrix replied. "I sent a personal message to their foreign minister 3 months ago. I received a response yesterday. It was polite and brief and completely uninterested. They do not need us anymore, Thex. That is the truth that none of the elder races want to face. We needed them far more than they needed us, and we were too blind to see it." Several younger species had attempted to bypass the council and make direct contact with humanity, hoping to establish bilateral relationships that did not involve the elder races. The human response was always the same: polite acknowledgement followed by firm declination. Humanity was focused on internal development and not interested in outside entanglements. Some of these younger species complained to the council, demanding that pressure be put on humanity to engage. Vraximus could only laugh bitterly at such demands. What pressure could they apply? Sanctions against a civilization that had willingly cut itself off from galactic trade? Military threats against a species that had been expanding and developing its forces without interference for 2 decades? The truth that kept Vraximus awake during his rest cycles was that humanity had become an unknown quantity. 20 years ago, he could have told you everything about human capabilities, their ship designs, their weapons technology, their population numbers. Now human space was a black box. No communications went in or out except carefully controlled diplomatic statements. No human ships visited alien ports where they could be observed and studied. No human researchers published in galactic journals where their work could be evaluated. The humans had simply vanished behind their borders, and no one knew what they had been building in the decades of isolation. Vraximus had finally drafted a comprehensive message to Earth, offering new negotiations with significantly better terms. He spent weeks crafting the language, trying to find words that acknowledged past mistakes without appearing weak. He offered full membership privileges, equal voting rights, and removal of all the restrictions that had been placed on human development. The message was sent through every channel the Council still maintained with humanity. Lisa Morgan, now 73 years old and long retired from government service, read the message in her apartment overlooking the Pacific Ocean. 45 years after humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, Admiral Greg Foster stood in the command center of the Defense Station Sentinel, watching sensor readings that made no sense according to everything the elder races knew about physics and warfare. The readings showed a fleet approaching from beyond the galactic rim, moving faster than should be possible, and in formations that no known civilization used. They had been designated the Krelthan Swarm, named after the first colony they had destroyed 3 months ago on the far edge of Council space. "How many ships are we looking at?" Greg asked his tactical officer, a sharp-minded man named Paul Turner, who had been tracking the Krelthan movement since they first appeared. "Best estimate is somewhere between 800 and 1,000 vessels," Paul replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what those numbers meant. "They are moving in waves, overwhelming defensive positions through sheer mass rather than superior technology. The Vraxi tried to hold them at the Kelthus system. They lost 37 ships in 4 hours before retreating." Greg pulled up the tactical reports from that battle, and studied them with the eye of someone who had spent 40 years in the human defense forces. The Vraxi had fought bravely, but their tactics were outdated, their coordination poor, their ships designed for the kind of limited conflicts the galaxy had been fighting for centuries. The Krelthan were something different, something that required the kind of total warfare that the elder races had forgotten how to wage. "What is their current trajectory?" Greg asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "They are bypassing human space entirely," Paul confirmed. "Projections show they will cut through the Morphid Coalition territory and straight into the resource-rich core worlds. They are ignoring our borders completely, probably because we have nothing they want, or because we have shown ourselves willing to defend our territory." Greg thought about the 3 Krelthan scout ships that had probed human defenses 6 weeks ago in the outer colonies. The battle had been brief and decisive, with human weapons cutting through their hulls like paper. The scouts had retreated, and the main Krelthan force had adjusted their course to avoid human space. That told Greg 2 important things. The Krelthan could learn and adapt, and they had decided humans were not worth the cost of fighting. "Send the tactical data to Fleet Command," Greg ordered. "They need to know what we are facing, even if it is not directly threatening us yet." On Earth, President Nathan Cole received the intelligence reports about the Krelthan advance with a heavy heart. He was 62 years old, had been in office for 6 years, and had never imagined he would face a decision like this. The Galactic Council that had dismissed humanity almost half a century ago was now facing an existential threat, and they had sent a desperate message to Earth begging for help. Nathan read the message again, noting the tone that had shifted from the condescension of the past to something approaching panic. "We face annihilation," Council Leader Vraximus had written, his words stripped of the careful diplomatic language and reduced to bare pleading. "Please help us. We acknowledge our past mistakes. We offer full reparations and complete acceptance of humanity as an equal partner. Please, we are dying." The President's cabinet sat around the conference table in silence, each of them wrestling with the moral weight of the decision before them. Secretary of Defense Linda Hayes spoke first, her voice quiet but firm. "The Krelthan will not stop at Council space. Paul Turner's analysis shows they are consuming resources as they advance. If they take the core worlds, they will have enough material to build a fleet 10 times their current size. Eventually, they will turn toward us. So we have a strategic interest in stopping them now rather than later," Nathan said. "But that is not the only consideration here. These are billions of sentient beings facing extinction. Can we really stand by and watch that happen?" Secretary of State Frank Morrison leaned forward, his expression troubled. "Mr. President, I understand the humanitarian argument, but we also need to consider what message we send by coming to their rescue after they spent years treating us like children who needed to wait our turn. If we save them now, what have we taught them? That they can dismiss us and then call for help when it suits them. We teach them that we are better than they are," said Vice President Ellen Baker. "We show them what it means to be civilized, not by following their rules, but by choosing to help even when we have no obligation to do so." The debate continued for 3 hours, voices rising and falling as cabinet members argued from principle and practicality, from moral duty and national interest. Nathan listened to all of them, weighing arguments that all had merit, trying to find wisdom in a situation where every choice carried enormous consequences. Finally, he raised his hand for silence. "I need to think about this. We reconvene tomorrow morning and I will have a decision." That night, Nathan walked alone in the gardens outside the presidential residence, looking up at stars that held both the civilization that had rejected humanity and the threat that would consume them all, if left unchecked. He thought about his grandmother, who had been a young woman when Lisa Morgan walked out of the council chambers, who had lived through the years of human isolation and pride and growth. She had told him once that the greatest test of character came not in how you treated those who respected you, but in how you treated those who had wronged you. By morning, Nathan had his answer. He called his cabinet together and spoke words that would define his presidency and possibly the future of humanity. "We will intervene, not because the council deserves our help, not because they have apologized or offered reparations, but because we have decided that is who we want to be. We will not become the kind of civilization that watches genocide unfold and does nothing simply because the victims once treated us poorly." The decision was not unanimous even within his cabinet. And when he announced it to the human people, the reaction was deeply divided. Millions of humans argued that the galaxy had made its choice decades ago and should face the consequences alone. Millions more agreed with the president that standing aside would betray the values humanity claimed to hold. The debate raged across every human world and station, passionate and bitter and ultimately democratic. The final vote was close, 53% in favor of intervention, but Nathan had his mandate. He gave the orders, and the human war machine that had been building in isolation for 4 decades began to move. Admiral Greg Foster received his new orders with mixed feelings. He agreed with the president's decision on moral grounds, but he also understood the anger of those who wanted to let the council face their own mistakes. He assembled his fleet commanders in a virtual conference, their faces appearing on screens around the command center, each of them leading forces that represented the cutting edge of human military capability. "Listen carefully," Greg told them. "We are not going to save the Galactic Council. We are going to stop the Krelthan swarm because they represent a threat to all sentient life, including our own. The council races are facing extinction because they forgot how to fight real wars, because they spent centuries playing at diplomacy while their military capabilities atrophied. We are going to show them what warfare looks like when conducted by a species that never had the luxury of taking peace for granted." The fleet began to assemble at the rally point, hundreds of human warships representing designs the council races had never seen. 45 years of independent development had produced vessels built around principles the elder races had banned or never explored. Human shields used quantum manipulation that the council considered too unstable. Human weapons fired projectiles at relativistic speeds using magnetic acceleration the council had deemed too energy-intensive. Human fighters employed AI-assisted targeting that the council had forbidden out of fear of artificial intelligence. On the Vraxi homeworld, Council leader Vraximus received word that the human fleet was moving toward council space. He was ancient now, barely able to move without assistance, but his mind remained sharp enough to understand what was happening. The humans were coming, not in response to his pleas, but because they had chosen to act. The distinction was important, and it cut deeper than any rejection could have. "They are not coming to save us," Vraximus told his advisors. "They are coming to stop a threat that will eventually reach them. We are just in the way." His chief advisor, a younger Vraxi named Kelthix, started to object, but Vraximus cut him off with a weak gesture. "Do not pretend otherwise. We treated them with contempt for years, and then expected them to forget that when we needed help. They have not forgotten. They have simply decided to be better than we were." The human fleet passed through the outer regions of council space without stopping to coordinate with local forces or request permission to operate in their territory. They moved with purpose and precision, headed directly toward the Keltheran core worlds where the Galactic Council was making what everyone expected to be their final stand. Behind them, alien civilizations watched and wondered what 4 decades of human isolation had created. The battle for the Keltheran core worlds had reached its breaking point when the human fleet arrived, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation at the edge of the combat zone. Admiral Greg Foster watched the tactical display showing the desperate situation unfolding before him. The Galactic Council's combined fleet was being systematically destroyed by the Krelthan swarm, their defensive lines collapsing under waves of enemy ships that seemed endless. In another hour, maybe 2, the core worlds would fall, and with them any hope of galactic civilization surviving this war. "All ships, combat formation Delta 7, Greg ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos displayed on his screens. "Target the lead Krelthan elements and fire on my command. Let us show them what 4 decades of human engineering looks like in practice." The human fleet moved like a single organism, ships coordinating through quantum communication networks that allowed instant tactical updates across the entire formation. The elder races watching from their failing defensive positions had never seen such precision, such perfect unity of purpose. Human weapons opened fire, and the result was devastating. Magnetic accelerators hurled projectiles at significant fractions of light speed, each impact releasing enough energy to vaporize Krelthan vessels in brilliant flashes of superheated plasma. Human missiles used AI targeting systems that predicted enemy movements with uncanny accuracy, striking at weak points in Krelthan formations with surgical precision. The Krelthan swarm, which had been advancing with mechanical certainty, suddenly faltered as their lead elements disappeared under human fire. They attempted to adapt, to shift their formations and redirect their forces, but human tactical computers were already 3 moves ahead. Every adjustment the Krelthan made was anticipated and countered before it could take effect. Within 20 minutes, the Krelthan advance had not just stopped, but begun to retreat, their ships falling back in disorder as they encountered resistance beyond anything they had faced from the Council races. On the bridge of the Vraxi flagship Eternal Wisdom, Commander Zeltix watched the human assault with a mixture of awe and humiliation. These were the same humans he had dismissed as useful, but unremarkable 45 years ago when Commander Jake Phillips had withdrawn from their joint patrol. Now he was watching human forces do in minutes what the combined might of the Galactic Council had failed to accomplish in weeks of desperate fighting. The tactical displays showed human ships moving with impossible coordination, their weapons striking with devastating accuracy, their shields absorbing Krelthan fire that would have crippled Council vessels. "Get our ships into formation with the human fleet," Zelthix ordered his crew, swallowing his pride because survival mattered more than dignity. "Follow their tactical lead and try not to get in their way." The scattered remnants of the Council fleet began pulling back toward the human formation, grateful for any shelter from the Krelthan assault. Human ships adjusted their positions to provide cover, their shields extending protection to alien vessels that had once looked down on humanity as an inferior species. The gesture was not lost on Zeltix, who found himself thinking about all the times he had treated human forces as expendable support, rather than valued allies. The battle continued for 6 more hours as additional human reinforcements arrived in waves, each fleet group adding fresh ships to the fight. The Krelthan swarm, for all its numbers and ferocity, had never encountered an opponent that could match its coordination while exceeding its firepower. Human weapons carved through Krelthan formations with clinical efficiency, destroying hundreds of enemy vessels while sustaining relatively minor losses. By the time the Krelthan finally withdrew completely, retreating back toward the galactic rim, they had lost nearly 60% of their invasion force. The silence that followed the battle felt strange after hours of weapons fire and explosions. Admiral Greg Foster surveyed the battlefield, noting the debris fields that marked where ships from a dozen different civilizations had made their final stand. Human casualties had been lighter than expected, but still significant. 43 ships destroyed, over 2,000 crew lost. Each death weighed on Greg's conscience, even though he knew the intervention had been necessary. "Admiral, we are receiving communication requests from every Council species," his communications officer reported. "They all want to thank us and discuss coordination for the continued defense." Greg considered the request for a long moment before responding. "Acknowledge their messages, but inform them that Admiral Foster will address all fleet commanders together in 6 hours. We have wounded to attend to and damage assessments to complete first." On Earth, President Nathan Cole watched the battle reports coming in and felt relief mixed with something more complicated. Humanity had proven its military superiority, had demonstrated beyond any doubt that the species the Council had dismissed as too young and impulsive was now the most powerful force in the galaxy. But that power came with responsibilities and choices that would define what humanity became in the years ahead. Lisa Morgan, now 85 years old and confined to a wheelchair by age and infirmity, sat in her apartment watching the news coverage of the battle. Her hands shook slightly as she activated her communication device and called President Cole, someone she had mentored when he was just starting in government service decades ago. "Nathan, you need to be very careful about what happens next," Lisa said when the president's face appeared on her screen. "We just saved the galaxy from extinction, and that gives us enormous power. The question is what we do with that power. Do we return to the Council chambers and accept their grateful apologies? Do we dictate terms from a position of strength? Or do we remain apart and let them rebuild on their own?" Nathan listened carefully, respecting the wisdom of the woman who had started this entire journey by walking out of a Council meeting half a century ago. "What would you do, Lisa?" "I would remind them that we did not come back for them," Lisa replied. "We came back because we decided that is who we want to be. The difference matters, Nathan. If they cannot understand that difference, then they have learned nothing." 6 hours after the battle ended, Admiral Greg Foster convened a virtual conference with the commanders of every surviving Council fleet. Their faces appeared on screens around his command center, a collection of alien species that represented what remained of galactic military power. Some looked grateful, others humbled, A few still carried traces of the arrogance that had defined Council attitudes toward humanity for so long. Commander Zeltix and esteemed colleagues, Greg began, his tone formal but not cold. The immediate Krelthan threat has been neutralized, but they will return once they rebuild their forces. This battle has revealed fundamental weaknesses in Council military doctrine that must be addressed if you hope to survive the next attack. I am willing to share human tactical data and training protocols, but I need to be very clear about the terms. We are not rejoining the Galactic Council. We are not seeking your approval or acceptance. We are offering assistance because the Krelthan represent a threat to all sentient life, including humanity. The Council commanders shifted uncomfortably, unused to being addressed as recipients of charity, rather than as the galaxy's rightful leaders. Celtic spoke first, his voice carrying none of its former condescension. Admiral Foster, we understand the situation. We are grateful for human intervention, and would welcome any assistance you are willing to provide. We make no demands and offer no conditions. We are simply asking for help. Greg nodded slowly, recognizing the humility in those words even if it came 45 years too late. Then we will work together to prepare for the next Krelthan offensive. But understand this. Human forces operate under human command. We will coordinate with your fleets, but we will not integrate into your command structure. We are independent allies, not subordinate members of your military hierarchy. The agreement was reached quickly because the Council races had no leverage, and everyone knew it. Over the following weeks, human military advisors began working with Council forces, teaching tactics and strategies that humanity had developed during its decades of isolation. Some Council officers resented learning from a species they had dismissed, but most recognized that pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. On the Vraxi homeworld, Council leader Vraximus received a personal message from President Nathan Cole. The message was brief and formal, expressing hope that galactic civilization would recover from the war, and offering limited trade and diplomatic contact on terms of complete equality. There was no mention of rejoining the Council, no interest in seeking membership in an organization that humanity had outgrown. Vraximus read the message 3 times, each reading driving home the reality that humanity had moved beyond needing or wanting what the Council could offer. They are not coming back. Vraximus told his advisors with a certainty born from finally understanding what he had failed to see 45 years ago. They saved us because they chose to be better than we were, but that does not mean they forgive us or want anything from us. We are simply another civilization to them now, neither special nor particularly important.